Hey there. Tonight, we are going down into the dust of ancient Babylon, where broken brick, rivamut, and old temple smoke seem to cling to the air even after 3,000 years. Archaeologists uncovered 7 clay tablets there, and on those tablets was a story so bold, it feels almost dangerous even now. A minor god becomes the ruler of heaven. Older gods are folded into his name. A city rewrites the universe until its own patron stands at the center of all things. If that kind of dark history is your thing, please like this video and subscribe. Now let the room grow quieter around you. Let your breathing settle into something slow and easy. We are not rushing anywhere tonight. We are going to walk into Babylon softly and listen to how a god was made supreme. Close your eyes for a moment and picture the place before the story begins. Not the Babylon of textbook diagrams. Not the tourist imagination with clean walls and tidy labels. I mean the older feeling of it. Mud brick darkening after sunset. Bitumen in the seams. The faint smell of warm river water from the Euphrates. Reed baskets. Incense smoke curling upward in temple courts. Oil lamps trembling in narrow chambers where scribes press wedge, shaped signs into wet clay, and do not know that strangers, thousands of years later, will lean over the same marks and try to hear the dead speak again. The source opens in ruins, and I think that is exactly right, because this story belongs to a city that was already half ghost by the time modern hands began uncovering it. Beneath sand and broken masonry, those 7 tablets waited with astonishing patience. They carried the memory of a god named Marduk, and at first that sounds simple enough. Another ancient god, another lost religion, another myth from a vanished people. But the deeper truth is stranger, and honestly, more human. This is not only the story of how Marduk became king of the gods, it is the story of how people can change heaven by changing the story they tell about it. That may sound too neat, but stay with it. The Babylonians did not merely worship Marduk. They elevated him. They expanded him. They gave him more titles, more victories, more theological weight, more cosmic duties, until a once minor local deity came to look inevitable, supreme, eternal. That transformation did not happen in one burst of divine revelation. It happened through politics, ritual, empire, memory, fear, and careful narrative craft. A local god was raised until the sky itself seemed to belong to him. I have always found that deeply eerie, not because it feels false, but because it feels familiar. Power rarely appears naked for long. It wants a story. It wants to sound ancient, natural, obvious, chosen. Marduk became supreme in part because Babylon became powerful, and Babylon became more powerful because it learned how to make its god sound like destiny. But before all that, before the great temples and the royal rituals and the cosmic propaganda, Mesopotamia belonged to older cities and older names. You can see them if you drift backward far enough. Uruk, Nippur, Eridu, great cities rising from the alluvial plain between the Tigris and Euphrates. where human beings first learned how to gather themselves into dense urban worlds, how to write, how to store grain, how to build temple after temple, each one dedicated to some divine presence that oversaw one corner of existence. The source is very good on this. The old Sumerian pantheon is not simple. It is crowded, layered, bureaucratic in almost a modern way. There are gods for sky, wind, wisdom, water, healing, writing, fertility, kingship, storms, crafts, boundaries, fields, birth, death, and things so specific they almost make you smile. Each city has its patron. Each divine office has its place. Each temple feeds a hierarchy of priests, offerings, songs, and obligations. It is less a clean family tree than a supernatural administration, a cosmic civil service with rivalries, old privileges, and endless political sensitivity. And at the top of this older order stand names that truly mattered. Anu, the distant sky father. Enlil, lord of wind and command. Ea, or Enki in older Sumerian tradition, the wise one of fresh water, magic, and clever designs. If you had asked an ancient Sumerian priest about these gods, he would answer quickly. If you had asked about Marduk at the wrong time, you might have received only a pause. That detail matters more than it first appears, because Marduk does not begin at the center. He begins on the edge. The source places Babylon itself in that same marginal position at first. Not the grand imperial Babylon of later imagination, but a smaller settlement, one city among many, overshadowed by older and more prestigious powers. That is where the atmosphere changes for me. I always find it strangely moving when the future center of the universe begins as an afterthought. Babylon sits in the middle region of Mesopotamia, not empty, not irrelevant, but not yet the city, not yet the place around which all meaning will be forced to turn. And its god is similarly modest. Archaeological and textual evidence suggests that Marduk may have roots in an older deity called Asalui. Some scholars debate the exact relationship, but the connection is important. Asaluhi was not a sky-shattering conqueror. He was a god of incantations, healing, and practical magic. A useful god, a local god, a god for sickness, for spoken charms, for keeping harmful forces away. He was associated with agriculture too, and with the spade, that most ordinary and humble of tools. I have always liked that detail. The future king of the gods begins with a farming implement, not lightning, not a war chariot. Ospade. There is something almost sly in that. The source notes that the very name Marduk may be connected to this symbol, though scholars debate the etymology. Perhaps it grows out of the old word for spade, perhaps from a phrase meaning calf of the sun god. We cannot be fully sure. That uncertainty is worth preserving because the uncertainty itself tells you something. Supreme gods usually arrive in history wearing older names, older fragments, older borrowed skins. They are assembled slowly. So picture Marduk in these early centuries, not as emperor of heaven, but as a local divine presence in a still modest city. He is useful. He is respectable enough. He has pedigree through Ea, but he is not yet remaking the cosmos. He is not yet swallowing the powers of rival gods. He is helping with fevers, fields, blessings, and localized sacred business. Nothing about him announces what he will become. Then Babylon changes, and once Babylon changes, Marduk has to change with it. The source turns here toward the Amorites, and you can feel the temperature rise a little. These were Semitic-speaking newcomers from the West, outsiders in one sense, though outsiders become insiders very quickly when they win. Around 1900 before the Common Era, an Amorite dynasty takes Babylon and begins lifting it out of obscurity. This is not sudden imperial glory at first, more like a gradual hardening of ambition. A city learning to think of itself as more than one city among many. And when cities change, their gods rarely remain still. This is one of the deepest patterns in the whole story. Deities and political centers are tied together like reflected faces in dark water. Rise one, and the other begins rising too. By the time Hammurabi appears, that relationship becomes impossible to ignore. He is the sixth king of the dynasty, and the source rightly treats him not just as a conqueror, but as a strategist of perception. We know him now mostly through his law code, that great stone stele with its strict judgments and famous eye for an eye's severity. But the source slows the camera, so to speak, and asks us to notice something more subtle. Hammurabi is not content merely to win battles. He wants reality itself to sound Babylonian. His conquests expand Babylon's reach. Rivals are defeated. Older Sumerian centers are brought under control. The city grows in authority, wealth, and confidence. At that point, a foolish ruler might simply declare, "Our God is greatest now. Obey or be crushed." But Hammurabi is cleverer than that. He understands that belief sinks deeper when it seems inherited rather than imposed. So in the great prologue to his law code, he invokes the traditional supreme gods, Anu and Enlil, and then presents Marduk as the one chosen by them to bring justice and welfare to the land. That move is almost gentle on the surface. No open rebellion against the old pantheon. No direct insult to ancient sacred order. Just a careful suggestion that the old divine authorities themselves have selected Babylon's god as their agent. It is brilliant. The older gods are not overthrown. They are made to authorize the rise of the newer one. You can almost hear the political intelligence in that wording. If you are a priest loyal to older traditions, you are not forced into immediate outrage. If you are Babylonian, you hear validation. If you are a conquered population, you are encouraged to believe this new order is not a violation, but a continuation. That is how theological conquest works at its most elegant. Not with smashing at first, but with absorption. The source calls this process syncretism, and it is one of the key ideas in the whole tale. Marduk does not rise by erasing every older god all at once. He rises by taking them in, piece by piece, function by function, name by name. Most importantly, He is increasingly identified with the Salui, that older incantation god from whom he may already partly descend. Prayers that once belonged to one can now be heard as prayers to the other. Old divine territory is not abandoned. It is folded inward. This is where the story begins to feel almost like the growth of an empire inside a body. A local god gathers attributes the way a powerful state gathers provinces. Quietly first, administratively, with just enough reverence shown to older authorities that resistance loses its clean edge. And still, at this stage, Marduk is not yet the unquestioned ruler of all. That is important. The source keeps us honest there. During Hammurabi's reign, Enlil remains a major authority. Marduk is rising. Yes, he mediates. He gains prestige. He becomes more than local. But he has not yet become the architect of all reality. The supreme cosmic drama still lies ahead. For now, the air in Babylon is changing. That is enough. Priests pronounce the god's name with slightly more confidence. Scribes write it with a little more centrality. The court speaks of justice in language increasingly tied to Babylon's divine patron. The city expands, and the temple with it. More offerings, more ritual weight, more theological room. Marduk is no longer a whisper. He is becoming a claim, and claims, once established, are very hard to shrink again. The night around Babylon grows quieter in my mind here. Not peaceful, charged, as if the city itself has started thinking larger thoughts. Somewhere along the Euphrates mud bricks cool after the day's heat. Oil lamps flicker inside shrines. Scribes lean over tablets. A king who understands power better than most men places old gods and new ambitions into the same sentence and changes the future. That future, though, is not smooth. Babylon will weaken. Dynasties will fall. Foreign powers will arrive. And in one of the strangest turns in the whole story, Marduk will keep rising even while the city that raised him stumbles. Which is why the next stage feels so uncanny. A god star climbing through political eclipse, as if narrative, once launched well enough, can outrun the very kingdom that first pushed it into the sky. There is something unnerving about a god growing stronger while his city grows weaker. The source lingers there, and I am glad it does, because this is where the story stops being a straightforward rise and becomes something stranger. We like causes to move in one direction. A city rises, so it God rise. A city falls, so its good fades. Clean, simple, almost mechanical. But history is usually more disobedient than that. After Hammurabi's great age, Babylon does not glide upward into unbroken dominance. It suffers. Dynasties collapse. Foreign powers intrude. The old confidence frays. And yet Marduk, instead of disappearing into the background again, continues gathering weight. That paradox is one of the first truly haunting things in the tale. When the first Babylonian dynasty ends, when Hittite raiders strike and political order breaks apart, one might expect the god of Babylon to diminish along with the city. But the source suggests almost the opposite. In times of chaos, people often cling harder to whatever promises order. That feels painfully true. When the world becomes unstable, a god associated with justice, restoration, and rightful balance may become more desirable, not less. Marduk begins to mean not only Babylon's present strength, but its hoped-for return. I have always found that emotionally persuasive. A weakened city may need a bigger god than a triumphant city does. And so, while Babylon passes through long years of reduced political influence, through Kassite control and the erosion of its former glory, Marduk's cult continues deepening. Temples may waver, buildings may decay, borders may shift, but religious imagination can outlive direct political strength for a surprisingly long time. In some ways, it may even become sharper when glory is lost. A god of restoration has more work to do in an age of damage. Then comes one of the most vivid moments in the whole source: the recovery of Marduk's statue. It is difficult for us to feel this properly at first because modern people are taught to think of sacred statues as symbols. Respectable, perhaps beautiful, perhaps emotionally important, but still only representations. Mesopotamian religion did not work that way. The god did not merely hover above the image. Through consecration and ritual activation, the image became the god's physical dwelling on earth. The statue was not a reminder of Marduk. It was Marduk, present in Babylonian space. That changes everything. So when the Elamites carried Marduk's statue away during one of their raids, it was not merely theft. It was cosmic rupture. The god had been taken captive. His temple stood hollow. Ritual life became incomplete. The city was left not only politically humiliated but spiritually dislocated. The source captures this with exactly the right gravity. A city without its god is not simply sad. It is metaphysically wrong. Now imagine the generations that follow. Priests serving in absence, processions remembered rather than enacted, the central chamber still standing, but lacking the embodied divine presence around which the whole system once turned. The air in such a temple must have felt unbearable, like a heart still trying to beat after something had been removed from the chest. Then, around 1100 before the Common Era, Nebuchadnezzar I does what must have felt impossible. He defeats the Elamites and brings the statue home. The source treats this not as a military footnote, but as restoration on the scale of heaven. And that is exactly right. Gold and silver can be replaced. A god returned is something else entirely. You can almost see the procession. Dust rising under sandals and chariot wheels. Incense thick in the air. The people pressing forward to witness. Priests carrying themselves with that mix of discipline and relief that comes when ritual has at last been made whole again. Somewhere within the ceremonial movement, under cloth and sacred handling, the body of the god passes back toward the city that claims him. Honestly, it is one of the most moving scenes in the whole story. Not because we must believe the theology as the Babylonians did, but because we can feel what return means in human terms. A city that thought itself abandoned sees its god come home. And once Marduk returns, the narrative machine begins turning much faster. The source places the final shaping of the Enuma Elish in or after this atmosphere of restoration, and the timing feels almost inevitable. If you are a king who has just brought back the captive body of your city's god, if you want to explain not only victory but meaning, what do? You commission or promote a story large enough to hold everything. A story in which Marduk is not simply Babylon's patron, among others, but the divine reason order exists at all. That is the genius of the Enuma Elish. It does not merely praise Marduk. It rearranges the universe so that praising Marduk seems like realism. The source calls it a religious coup carried out through narrative, and that phrase stays with me. No swords at first. No smashed altars in the opening lines. Just a story so expansive, so audacious, that by the time it is finished, the old hierarchy has been quietly replaced. It begins before names, before sky and earth as we know them, in the mingling waters of Apsu and Tiamat. Fresh water and salt water. Primordial principles more than recognizable personalities at first. The source is very gentle in guiding us into this old dark. That matters, because creation stories are most powerful when they feel like entry into a place where ordinary structure has not yet hardened. No city walls, no calendars, no kings. Only water, potential, and the first stirring of differentiation. From this mingling come the earliest generations of gods, Lachmu and Lahamu, then Anshar and Kishar, then Anu, then Ea. The divine family expands, but it does not arrive peacefully. The younger gods are noisy, restless, alive in the offensive way young beings often are to the old. Their movement disturbs Apsu. He cannot sleep. The source handles this detail wonderfully because it makes cosmic conflict begin not with abstract evil, but with irritation. The old father wants silence. The children will not stop. You can almost smile at that, until you remember what follows. Apsu decides they must die. There is something so cold in that decision. Not a lecture, not discipline. Elimination. Tiamat recoils. These are our children. How can you speak of such a thing? But the older order has already tipped toward violence. The young, in this story, are not merely annoying. They are destabilizing. They represent the disorder that comes when the next generation refuses to remain quiet inside the frame set by the previous one. The source is very sharp here. Beneath the divine names lies a permanent human pattern. Old order against new order. Stability against change. Father against child. Authority against disruption. But Ea is clever. He learns of the plot and acts first. He casts Apsu into magical sleep and kills him. It is worth slowing down there. The son kills the father. The younger generation survives through preemptive violence. Already, the old world has been ruptured in a way that cannot be repaired. And what does Ea do next? He builds his dwelling over the slain body. He takes the deep, fresh waters as his own domain. From this space, built above the murder, the next stage of reality begins. I have always found that detail extraordinary. The new order literally builds itself atop the body of the old. In that house, upon that victory, Marduk is born. The source becomes almost luminous at this point. Marduk does not emerge as a minor infant struggling upward. He arrives already marked, beautiful beyond measure, strong from the first moment, 4 eyes, 4 ears, fire leaping from his mouth when he speaks. Ea looks on him with pride and gives him a double portion of divinity. It is as if the text itself is overcompensating, telling the audience from the start that this child is no ordinary god, no mere heir in a line of many. He is exceptional by design. Supremacy has been written into him before he has earned it. That, to me, is one of the most revealing features of the whole epic. Marduk's greatness is narrated as obvious because the story has already decided the end. He is born in retrospective propaganda. The source never says it quite so bluntly, but you can feel it. The child is described by people who already need him to rule the cosmos. Meanwhile, Tiamat has not forgotten. Her mate has been slain. The younger gods have broken the oldest peace. Grief in ancient myths rarely remains soft for long, and here it does not. Urged on by the older forces around her, Tiamat transforms. The mother becomes the great adversary. The source is very effective at this turn because it does not rush it. Tiamat does not begin as monster. She becomes monstrous in response to violation. That moral ambiguity gives the whole cosmic battle a shadow that never fully leaves it. Then come the creatures. Giant serpent, dragons, scorpion men, fishmen, beast forms made from dread and ancient fascination. The text relishes them, and the source rightly relishes them too. You can feel the thrill and fear of listing chaos into being. 11 terrible beings, each one a kind of nightmare given limbs. At their head, Tiamat places Kingu, here chosen consort, and gives him the tablet of destinies. That object is crucial. Whoever holds it governs decree itself. Fate, authority, the shape of what may be and what may not be, all of it gathers there. This is not just a war of monsters and storms now. It is a war over who gets to define reality. And the younger gods are terrified. That terror is important. So clever against Apsu, cannot stand firm before Tiamat. Anu too fails. The old great names hesitate. The source is brilliant in allowing their fear to breathe. It makes Marduk's eventual entrance feel less like a simple heroic beat and more like a political opening. The established powers cannot solve the crisis they helped create. Someone new steps in, but not selflessly. This is one of the places where the source becomes almost deliciously sharp. Marduk does not volunteer in pure noble sacrifice. He negotiates. He names his price. If he saves them, if he defeats Tiamat and restores order, then he will be king of all gods. His word must become law. His authority must be absolute and permanent. You have to admire the nerve of it. The universe is collapsing, and he uses the emergency to bargain for the throne. Honestly, it feels less like mythic innocence and more like court politics raised to cosmic scale. A crisis appears. The ambitious figure says he alone can solve it. He requests emergency powers. The frightened assembly agrees. The gods gather. They feast. They drink. The source lingers on that too, and I am glad. There is something wonderfully human in the image of terrified divine beings getting drunk before surrendering their constitutional order to a charismatic war candidate. Then they test him. He must make a constellation vanish and return by command alone. He speaks. It disappears. He speaks again. It comes back. Reality responds. That is enough. They arm him, crown him, and let destiny narrow around a single name. At this point, the air in the story changes completely. The old order is still visible behind us, but only faintly. Babylon's god is no longer rising quietly through syncretism and priestly wording. He is about to seize the cosmos itself. And that is why the next movement feels so sharp. Storm chariot. Winds. Tiamat opening her jaws. The arrow. The split body. The universe made from a corpse. The full shape of Marduk's ambition has not yet finished revealing itself, but we are very close now, and the dark waters are already beginning to tremble. The hall has already fallen quiet by the time Marduk rises. That silence matters. It is not peace. It is the sort of silence that comes when fear has exhausted the room and left it waiting for whoever is bold enough or hungry enough to step into the middle of it. The gods have feasted. They have tested him. They have watched a constellation vanish and return at his command. And now the old order is doing something old orders always do when they no longer trust themselves. It is handing its danger to the one figure ambitious enough to call danger an opportunity. The source is especially sharp here because it does not let Marduk look merely noble. He is magnificent. Yes, the text wants him magnificent. But he is also calculating. He does not stumble into greatness. He negotiates for it. He knows the shape of the crisis. And he knows that a frightened assembly will sign away its own future if the promise of rescue is presented with enough confidence. I have always found that one of the most human things in the whole story, before the first arrow flies, before Tiamat opens her great jaws, the true victory has almost already happened. The gods have agreed to need him. And once they need him, they must arm him. This is where the source slows just enough to let the pageantry breathe. Marduk does not walk into battle like a local river god with a lucky charm and some confidence. He is outfitted as a cosmic king. They place the scepter in his hand. The throne is named for him in advance. They crown him before the war is won, which tells you everything about how badly the assembly wants certainty. Then come the weapons. Bow, arrow, mace, the net. The winds gathered and bent to his purpose. The terrible storm chariot drawn not by ordinary beasts, but by creatures fashioned for divine war, their mouths frothing poison, their pace impossible, their hooves almost sounding like thunder before thunder is even born. If you were standing there with me in imagination, in that bright, fearful chamber among trembling gods and overturned cups, I think what would strike you most is how much this feels like a coronation disguised as defense. He is being sent to save them, yes, but he is also being revealed to them, almost theatrically, as the form their future has already chosen. And then there is Tiamat. The source never lets her become merely a beast, and that matters. She is chaos now. Yes, she is mother of monsters, sea without shore, old power wounded into ferocity. Yet she is also the memory of something older than all these younger gods crowding around Marduk's rising star. She belonged to the first waters. She is not an invader into order. In a darker reading, she is what order itself had to mutilate in order to be born. That ambiguity gives the whole battle its strange, cold dignity. We know who the epic wants us to cheer for. The deeper the source goes, the less simple cheering becomes. Still, the story is moving toward conflict, and it does so with grand confidence. Marduk mounts his storm chariot. The winds cluster around him like obedient hunting hounds. The text names them one by one in various traditions: evil wind, whirlwind, cyclone, tempest. The four directional winds, all recruited into one divine body of force. I love that detail because it turns weather itself into political allegiance. Even the air has chosen sides now. Even movement belongs to him. The source makes excellent use of that mood. Marduk does not merely fight in the world. He arrives as if the world has started reorganizing around his will before the victory is complete. The scene opens wide. Tiamat stands first, sea mother and war queen, surrounded by the strange brood she has called into being. Serpents long as rivers, scorpion forms, horned monsters, things with too many claws or too much intelligence in the eyes. The old imagination of Mesopotamia knew how to make terror feel ceremonial, and this is one of the finest examples of it. The source wisely dwells here because the monster army is not just spectacle. It is a catalog of what the ordered city fears most: boundary collapse, hybrid beings, wild force, the refusal of categories to remain polite. Kingu stands beside her too, wearing the tablet of destinies. That object has almost become a low hum in the background by now, but it remains the center of everything. Whoever holds the tablet does not merely wear honor. He governs decree, fate, legitimacy. It is the nearest thing this myth has to the machinery of law, and there is something deliciously Babylonian about that. The cosmic struggle is not only about strength, it is about lawful authority. Who gets to command? Who gets to define what is binding? Who gets to say, this is the order of things, and have the universe nod in submission? That is not a wilderness myth. That is a city myth, a bureaucratic myth, a myth written by people who understood that power lasts longest when it looks administrative. And so the two sides approach one another, one carrying primordial grievance, the other carrying new law in storm form. The source stages their confrontation beautifully. There is a pause before the violence, an exchange, a declaration. Words are spoken because words matter here. Tiamat is accused of unnatural revolt, though one might privately note that the younger gods began the cycle of bloodshed long before this moment. Marduk speaks as if judgment has already gone his way. Tiamat answers from the older darkness. The whole cosmos feels suspended on a breath. Then the trap closes. This may be my favorite detail in the whole battle. Marduk does not simply overpower Tiamat with blunt strength. He uses arrangement. He uses timing. He uses the winds. He drives them into her open mouth so that her body is distended and she cannot close herself against what is coming. It is a violent image. Yes, but the source wisely treats it with a little distance, almost as one would describe a storm front overtaking the sea. The winds fill her. Chaos is forced open from within. The body that once held all possibility is made vulnerable by the very movement of the air. Then the arrow flies. It enters. It tears. It reaches the heart. Tiamat collapses. The text presents this as total triumph, and in Babylonian public ritual it would have functioned that way. Pure confirmation that Marduk is the only one fit to reign. But if you sit with it in the dark a little longer, it becomes stranger. He has not defeated a mere monster. He has slain the old mother from whom the first gods rose. Order is born not only through courage, but through a second primordial murder. That is the shadow behind all his glory. The source is at its best when it lets that shadow remain, because it turns triumph into unease, and unease into awe. The monster host breaks. Kingu is captured. The others are bound. The tablet of destinies is seized from the chest of the appointed rival and fastened to Marduk's own breast. The transfer is both military and ceremonial. Fate has changed ownership. Decree has a new voice. The older rebellion, if that is what one calls it, is not merely scattered. It is legislated out of existence. And then comes the most astonishing move of all. Marduk does not leave the corpse alone. He looks at Tiamat's body, and instead of letting it remain a symbol of conquered chaos, he makes it raw material. He splits her like a shellfish, the old translations say, or like a dried fish in some versions, one half set above, one half below. Heaven from one portion, earth from the other. Bars and bolts fixed to keep the waters in place. Rivers from the eyes in some traditional retellings. Mountain-like formations implied by the stretched body of the dead. The source rightly emphasizes this. Chaos is not erased. It is reorganized. The ordered world is built from the defeated body of the old world. That may be the most Babylonian idea in the whole epic. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is left outside administration. Even primordial terror is turned into architecture. I have always found that detail almost unbearably elegant. It means the world remains rooted in what was conquered. Order is not pure. It is structured violence that has learned how to call itself stability. Once you see that, Marduk becomes much more than a hero. He becomes the master planner of a cosmos built on managed ruin. The source continues into his arrangement of the sky. And this deserves time because it reveals another side of his kingship. After the battle, he does not simply bask. He organizes. He fixes stations for the gods. He sets the stars in place. He measures the year. He assigns the moon its cycle. He creates a calendar. That detail is so revealing. The conqueror becomes administrator instantly. Victory means scheduling. The heavens become a bureaucracy. You know that feeling when a person shows what they really value in the first hour after winning power? Marduk wins, and immediately begins assigning offices. That is not a flaw in the epic. It is its thesis. Babylon does not imagine ideal kingship as endless battle. It imagines ideal kingship as victorious force, followed by controlled distribution. Storm first. Lists after. A cosmic empire built by war, then stabilized through measured repetition. The stars do not just shine. They report for duty. The source also implies something broader here, that the Enuma Elish is not merely explaining the origin of the world. It is modeling the ideal structure of Babylonian rule. Disorder exists. A crisis emerges. The old authorities fail. A new power bargains for supreme command. That power wins through overwhelming force. Then it imposes order, ranks, assignments, and ritual centralization. This is not only myth. It is political philosophy wearing divine clothes. Honestly, I think that is why the story remains so compelling. It tells the truth about empire more openly than many empires tell it about themselves. But the work is not finished once the sky and earth are arranged. There is still the problem of labor. The gods, now safe, are not eager to spend eternity maintaining canals, temples, offerings, and the endless toil of sacred service. The source prepares us for this gently, because the answer is dark in a very calm way. Humanity is not created as a crown of glory. Humanity is created as a convenience. That is one of the coldest theological ideas in the ancient world, and perhaps one of the most honest. Yet before we get there, the room in the story changes one more time. The battle smoke settles. The stars hold their places. Tiamat has become structure. Kingu lies defeated. The divine assembly looks at Marduk not with fear now, but with the strange gratitude that very quickly becomes dependence. They needed a savior. What they have now is a ruler who has already remade reality in his own image. And the next thing he will do is make servants. That is where the story goes on from here. From the dead body of chaos to clay and blood. From cosmic administration to Babylon itself. From heaven's victory to the creation of human labor and the temple city that will proclaim Marduk's names until even older gods begin fading inside them. Once the sky has been measured and the stars assigned their stations, the great question becomes almost embarrassingly practical. Who will keep all of this going? That may sound too mundane after such a magnificent battle, but the source knows better. Great myths often reveal their true character not in the thunder of combat, but in what happens afterward. The universe has been built from Tiamat's broken body. The old danger has been caged inside structure. The younger gods are safe. Marduk has proven himself not only as warrior but as organizer. And then, with almost bureaucratic inevitability, the issue of labor arrives. The gods are tired. That is such an extraordinary detail when you stop to feel it. Divine beings complaining about work. Divine beings wanting release from maintenance. irrigation, offerings, order keeping, temple building, all the endless practical burdens of the cosmos. The source does exactly the right thing with this. It does not hurry past the complaint. It lingers just long enough for the listener to realize that Babylonian theology is not constructing a warm universe. It is constructing an efficient one. Even heaven wants servants. So Marduk proposes the final solution. A rebel shall bear the burden. The source leads us carefully into the figure of Kingu because he matters more than people often notice. Kingu is not simply one monster ally among many. Tiamat gave him rank. She fastened the tablet of destinies to his chest. She made him consort and commander. In that sense, he becomes the perfect candidate for sacrificial blame. The defeated usurper, the one whose blood can be taken and turned into a lower race whose whole purpose is to relieve the gods of toil. There is a very sharp political instinct hidden here. The new order chooses not just any victim, but the official emblem of the old resistance. And then comes the making of humankind. Kingu's blood is spilled. Clay is mixed with it. From blood and mud, the human race emerges. I have always found this one of the bleakest creation scenes in ancient literature. There is something almost intimate and almost insulting in it. Blood gives life. Yes. Clay gives shape. Yes. The combination sounds noble for a moment until the purpose is spoken aloud. Humans are made to work, to build, to maintain, to offer sacrifices, to keep temples alive, to carry the weight that the gods no longer wish to bear. This is not a theology of human centrality. It is a theology of human utility. The source is wise to pause here because modern audiences often instinctively search ancient creation myths for affirmation. A loving creator, a dignified role, some warm claim that humanity is cherished. The Babylonian answer is colder, though not entirely hopeless. Humans matter because they are useful to the divine order. Their value is real, but instrumental. They are born from divine residue, rebel blood and sacred clay, yet the reason for their existence is service. You can feel the whole social world of Mesopotamia hiding inside that idea. Temples needed food, lavor, washing, singing, offerings, maintenance, calendars, records, and fields to support all of it. Cities needed walls, canals, grain stores, judges, and kings who could pretend their rule reflected heaven. Human beings did all of that, so the myth explains the arrangement with terrible elegance. Why do we labor? Because that is why we were made. Why do the gods receive? Because that is what the world is for. Why is hierarchy natural? Because the cosmos itself was founded through rank, violence, an assigned burden. The source is especially good here because it lets the sadness sit without making the narration bitter. There is still wonder in this old vision. Humans carry divine blood. After all, though it is the blood of a condemned rebel, humans come from clay, which means they belong to the earth and can be shaped. There is dignity in formation even when the purpose is hard. Yet the darkness remains. The first gift given to humanity is obligation. From there, the story turns toward the thing that matters most to Babylonian memory, the city itself. Now that order exists, and now that labor exists to sustain order, Marduk's proper earthly center must be built. Babylon is no longer merely a city on a river plain. In the epic logic, it becomes the meeting point of heaven and earth, the administrative capital of the cosmos. The source treats this not as a side note, but as the real destination of the whole myth. Everything has been moving toward this. The battle with Tiamat, the organization of the sky, the creation of laboring humanity. All of it makes fullest sense only when Babylon appears as the final sacred answer. That is why Esagila matters so much. The great temple of Marduk, with its courts, its sacred chambers, its storerooms, its priests, its offerings, and its inner concentration of divine presence, becomes more than architecture. It becomes proof that cosmic order has an address. And above or beside it, in broader sacred imagination, rises the great ziggurat, perhaps the one later traditions tangled into the memory of Babel, that immense stepped mountain of brick and bitumen, artificial yet aspiring, layered like an argument rising from earth toward the sky. If you were standing in Babylon at the height of its ritual life, I think what would disturb you most would not be the scale alone. It would be the confidence. Blue glazed bricks, shining, processional ways prepared, priests moving in linen and perfume, offerings carried inward, singers, scribes, and administrators, all acting as though the center of the universe were not a metaphor but a civic fact. That sort of certainty is always unsettling when empire has it. The source also lingers, rightly, on Marduk's 50 names. This is one of the great acts of theological absorption in ancient religion. After his victory, Marduk is praised with title after title, each one linking him to powers and offices once distributed among older gods. He is Lord of Wisdom, Lord of Kingship, Lord of Fertility, Lord of Judgment. The names are not random ornaments. They are annexations. Every divine function named under him becomes one more territory brought into Babylon's order. I have always found that part almost chilling. It is not enough for Marduk to be strongest. He must become everyone important. This is how older, divine rivals are conquered without necessarily being erased outright. Their qualities are preserved, but under a new signature. Their domains survive, but as departments of Marduk's greater sovereignty. Enlil, in particular, is quietly overshadowed this way. The old Lord of Command is not openly humiliated on every line. Something subtler happens. His authority is redistributed upward into Marduk until the older hierarchy begins feeling like a draft version of Babylon's final truth. The source calls attention to this with excellent judgment. Myth here is not recording cosmic reality. It is manufacturing centralization. If one city now rules many, then one god should rule many. If one temple stands above others, then one divine name should contain the powers of several rivals. The story is doing political work while pretending only to speak about creation. And then comes ritual, because no myth rules for long unless it learns how to step down off the tablet and enter public time. The Akitu festival is one of the source's most important sections, and it deserves to feel slow. New Year in Babylon. processions. Show. Sacred recitation. Marduk's story spoken again, not as entertainment, but as maintenance. The universe is not simply remembered. It is renewed. The king himself is drawn into the theater. He is led before Marduk. He is stripped of royal regalia. He is slapped by the high priest and made to confess that he has not failed the god, not ruined the city, not neglected his duty. If tears come to his eyes, the omen is good. Marduk has accepted him. Then his insignia are restored. What a ritual! What a masterpiece of political theology! A king who rules an empire must publicly kneel beneath the god who authorized that empire. Humiliation and restoration become part of cosmic order. The source is excellent at showing why this matters. No Babylonian monarch can claim to stand above Marduk. Even at the peak of royal display, the ritual system reminds everyone that kingship is delegated. Babylon rules because Marduk rules. The king is magnificent only by permission. You know that feeling when power puts on a performance of humility in order to emerge even stronger. The Akitu festival understands that trick perfectly. The Enuma Elish is recited in this context, and that is what gives it such weight. It is not just read privately by scribes in lamplight. It is spoken into civic time. The battle with Tiamat becomes the logic of the year itself. Marduk's victory becomes the reassurance that order will continue. Babylon hears again that it is the chosen center, and the king hears again that his own authority exists only as an echo of the god's greater decree. The source also widens beyond Babylon in these movements, which is essential. Once a god becomes this central, every empire touching Babylon must decide what to do with him. Assyrians are a perfect example. They admired, feared, borrowed from, and rivaled Babylon in cycles. At one point, they even rewrote the Enuma Elish by replacing Marduk with Ashur, their own national god. I find that almost darkly funny. The myth is so useful that it is copied with the name changed, as if divine supremacy were a thrown label that could be peeled off and stuck onto another empire's patron. That detail tells you everything about the nature of the text. The structure matters more than the personality. Cosmic war. Supreme victor. Ordered world. Chosen city or nation. Ritual reaffirmation. The template is imperial, and it travels. Then there are the Judeans in exile. Another crucial turn the source handles with great care. When Babylon conquers Jerusalem and drags elites into captivity, they do not only meet Babylonian armies. They meet Babylonian cosmology. They hear a world in which Marduk defeated chaos, created humanity for labor, and established Babylon as the center of sacred history. The source suggests, very plausibly, that parts of the Hebrew response in Genesis and the prophets can be read against this backdrop: a single God creating calmly by speech. Waters present, yes, but not rival divinities. No divine combat required. No city elevated as the eternal center by cosmic violence. It is one of the great theological countermoves in human history. Honestly, I find that immensely beautiful. One empire says, "Our God fought chaos and founded the world around our city." The exiled answer, eventually, is quieter and perhaps even more radical. No. The true God needs no battle to create, and no empire owns the center. The Persians, too, step into Marduk's shadow in their own way. Cyrus enters Babylon not by mocking its god, but by claiming the god favored him. That is political intelligence of the highest order. You do not conquer Babylon by insulting the deity who legitimizes kingship there. You let that deity choose you. The source is very good on this. Marduk's power extends even into the language used by outsiders who replace Babylon's native rulers. That is how deeply narrative conquest can work. But of course, no empire holds forever. Babylon declines. Temples continue for a time. Priests continue. Hellenistic overlays come. Old rites persist in altered forms. Yet the great center begins loosening. The statue of Marduk, once the living core of civic identity, becomes vulnerable again. Under Xerxes, perhaps, major blows fall against Babylonian cult life. The evidence is debated in details, and the source wisely keeps some caution there. We cannot always map each final act with perfect clarity, but the overall movement is unmistakable. The cult weakens. The sacred machinery sputters. Cuneiform itself declines over centuries until the script that preserved Marduk's ascent can no longer be read by the descendants of those who walk among the same broken walls. And that may be the saddest part of all. A god made supreme through text, ritual, empire, and repetition eventually loses the people who can hear his name properly in the old signs. The source closes that long arc with the rediscovery of the tablets in the modern age, and I think that ending is perfect. Dust brushed aside. Clay signs read again. A voice once used to crown a god over heaven brought back into the light by archaeologists, philologists, museums, and scholars with tired eyes and patient hands. Marduk does not return as he once did. No processions. No statue homecoming. No king slapped before the altar. Only translation, reconstruction, thought. Still, there is something moving in that too. A story that once justified empire now survives as evidence. A supreme god becomes a case study in how supremacy is built. The source's final lesson is not cynical exactly, but it is lucid. Marduk did not triumph because he had always been the obvious lord of all things. He triumphed because Babylon raised him there through language, ritual, architecture, administration, and political need. In the end, the cosmic war mirrors a human one. A city climbed, and its god climbed with it. A city fell, and the god dimmed with it. If you sit quietly with that at the end, it becomes almost soothing. Not because it is cheerful. It is not. But because it tells the truth about something very old in us. We make worlds. Not from nothing. From clay, blood, fear, ambition, memory, and story. We raise powers above us. Then build temples so we can kneel before what we ourselves helped make. Marduk's rise is therefore not only Babylon's history. It is a mirror. It shows how belief and empire hold each other up, and how even gods can inherit the shape of cities. The tablets remain. The dust remains. The old names remain. Apsu, Tiamat, Ea, Kingu, Marduk. They drift toward us over broken centuries like embers from a fire that once seemed eternal. And somewhere in that glow, the old city still tries to tell us what it believed. Not merely that its God was strongest, that its order was the order of the world itself. That is always the boldest claim power can make. And perhaps the oldest. The river still moves past Babylon's ruins. Wind still crosses the plain. The ziggurats are broken. The priests are gone. And the God who once sat in the center of heaven survives now in fractured clay and careful translation. Yet the ambition that raised him feels uncannily alive. That is what makes the story linger after the names have quieted. Not just the fall of one God, but the enduring human desire to take a local truth, crown it universal, and call the result destiny. And the night beside our own fire grows still enough now to hear those tablets cooling in the dark again, stacked in silence, waiting for the next pair of patient hands. The world before Marduk was not empty. That is the first thing the old tablets want us to feel. It was vet, dark, unmeasured, and alive in a way that is difficult to picture if your mind is used to clean horizons and settled land. There were no walls yet, no temples, no canals laid out by careful hands, no kings standing beneath carved symbols, no scribes drying tablets in ordered rooms. There was only mingled water, fresh and salt together, heavy with potential and not yet disciplined into shape. The source slows beautifully here, and it should, because this is not merely a prologue. It is the emotional foundation of everything that follows. Before Marduk can become the great organizer, the Lord of measured order, the tablets must first open a world that has not been measured at all. Apsu, the fresh-water deep. Tiamat, the saltwater sea. Their mingling is the first condition, the oldest marriage, the beginning before beginnings. I have always found it strangely soothing that Mesopotamian imagination begins not with a dry command or a sudden burst of light, but with water, endless, dark, moving water, the kind that can cradle and destroy at the same time. From those waters come the first divine generations, and the source is careful not to rush the names. Lachmu and Lahamu, then Anshar and Kishar, then Anu, then Ea, also called Enki in older Sumerian tradition, the clever, deep-minded god of wisdom, fresh water, magic, and cunning solutions. These names arrive like the slow lifting of structure out of mist. Not all at once. Not in one clean ladder. More like a family forming under pressure, one generation after another, each bringing more motion into the old stillness. And that motion becomes the problem. The younger gods are loud. That little detail has always delighted me because it is so grand and so domestic at the same time. The old cosmic peace is not broken first by abstract evil. It is broken by noise. The younger divine generation is restless, active, bright with their own presence. They disturb Apsu. He cannot sleep. The old father of the fresh waters is wearied by life itself in its younger form. The source understands the power of that image. It turns the first divine conflict into something painfully recognizable. One order resents the movement of the next. Stability becomes irritation. Irritation becomes judgment. Apsu decides the younger gods must be destroyed. There is no softness in that decision. No attempt to reform, guide, or discipline. Elimination. Tiamat, in the old story, recoils from the thought at first. These are their children. How can he speak this way? That hesitation matters. It tells us that Tiamat does not begin as the monstrous enemy she will later become. She begins as mother. The source is wise to preserve that because later Babylonian theology has every reason to make her seem naturally chaotic, naturally threatening, naturally fit for slaughter. But the earlier emotional truth is darker. Chaos is not merely born. It is provoked. Ea learns of Apsu's plan. And here, the tablets reveal one of the oldest and coldest patterns in myth. The child strikes first. Ea uses magic, puts Apsu to sleep, and kills him. No dwell of equals. No prolonged warning. A sleep, a stilling, a murder. Then, and this is one of the details that always makes me pause, Ea establishes his dwelling above the slain father. A new order rises literally on the body of the previous one. The source rightly lingers there. It is not decorative symbolism. It is the whole logic of the myth in miniature. Order in this world is not innocence. It is organized after violence. It is in that new house, in that space built over the conquered deep, that Marduk is born. The story cannot wait to tell you he is extraordinary. It almost trembles with the need. Marduk is not introduced as an ordinary divine child who will struggle upward by merit alone. He arrives already marked, beautiful beyond measure, powerful from the first moment. 4 eyes, 4 ears, fire flashing from his mouth. A body too full of force for any modest future. The source catches exactly the right tone here, because the exaggeration is the point. By the time the tablets describing him were copied and recited in Babylon, the city needed its god to have always looked inevitable. So the child is written in retrospective glory. His supremacy is planted into the nursery. You know that feeling when a story is praising someone so intensely that you can hear the political need behind the praise. That is Marduk's birth. The language is not trying to discover him. It is trying to enthrone him before the battle has even begun. Ea looks on his son with wonder and gives him a double share of divine nature. There is a great deal hidden in that small phrase. It does not only make Marduk strong, it ties him to the old wise power of the deep. He is not an upstart from nowhere. The myth quietly roots him in respected lineage. That matters because Marduk will soon be asked to outrank gods older than himself. If he is to do that convincingly, he must not appear rootless. He must appear chosen within the system even while preparing to replace it. I have always thought that was one of the cleverest parts of the entire Babylonian imagination. Marduk is both new and legitimate. both disruptive and proper. He is the perfect god for a rising city that wants power without looking crude in the act of taking it. But while Marduk grows in brightness, Tiamat is changing too. The source makes this transformation feel slow, and that is right. She has lost Apsu. The first stable order has been broken. The younger gods now occupy the world that rose from her body and Apsu's mingled depths. Around her gather voices, anciens forces, resentments, and urgings. In some versions, it is not one sudden moral snap, but an accumulation. Grief becoming fury, memory becoming rebellion, motherhood twisting under violation until it can no longer remain merely sorrowful. Then she begins to create. This is one of the strangest, richest passages in the old tradition. Tiamat, once the Great Mother, becomes mother again, but now to terror. Serpent, dragons, hybrid forms, things with scorpion tails, lion claws, horned skulls, impossible combinations of animal dread and supernatural intention. The source rightly lets this list breathe because it is not only spectacle, it is chaos given inventory. The orderly imagination of the city writes down what it fears most by describing beings that do not stay in their categories. A scorpion that thinks, a serpent armed for war, a monster that is too many things at once. Civilization has always found hybrids unsettling because hybrids refuse administration. And at the center of this dark new court, Tiamat raises Kingu. Kingu is such a fascinating figure in the source. He is not the main villain in popular memory. He is often remembered only because his blood will later be used to make humanity. But the tablets give him a terrible importance. Tiamat appoints him consort and commander. More than that, she places the Tablet of Destinies upon his chest. This is no minor decoration. The tablet is cosmic legitimacy made visible. Decree itself, the right to establish order, the power to say what must be and have being obey. By giving it to Kingu, Tiamat is not merely selecting a military captain. She is building a rival sovereignty. That is what makes the story so politically sharp. It is not just war between good and evil. It is a constitutional crisis in heaven. The younger gods panic. That panic is one of the source's strongest moods. The same deities who rattled the old peace with their bright, restless energy now tremble before what they have helped awaken. Ea, clever enough to murder Apsu in his sleep, cannot face Tiamat directly. Anu too fails. The great names of the older divine administration retreat. Their courage seems thin when the mother of primordial waters rises in full wrath. Honestly, I always find that moment darkly funny. The old masters of the pantheon are excellent at rank, speech, and inherited authority right up until the room genuinely requires someone to go outside and face the storm. Then Marduk steps forward. Not tenderly, not modestly, not with the shy nobility later religious storytelling often likes to manufacture. He steps forward like someone who has been waiting for the right crisis. The source gets this exactly right. Marduk will fight. Yes. He will save them. Yes. But only if the gods grant him absolute kingship in return. If he defeats Tiamat, his word must become law. His authority must be final. No appeals, no rival jurisdictions, no returning to the old divine bureaucracy once the emergency has passed. There is such a modern coldness in that bargain. The council is frightened. They need a savior. The savior offers help at the price of permanent sovereignty. A crisis becomes the ladder by which supremacy climbs. The gods agree because fear makes centralization feel like relief. Then comes the banquet. Wine, be it, food, solemn assembly. The source wisely preserves this strange scene because it reveals Babylonian political imagination in miniature. The divine council does not respond to crisis with pure action. It responds with ceremony, with confirmation, with public assent. They test Marduk. He commands a constellation to vanish and return. It does so. Speech itself obeys him. Reality listens. That is enough. They place the scepter in his hand, the throne beneath him, the weaponry around him, and they crown in ritual what fear has already accepted. Marduk's rise in this moment feels less like a heroic appointment and more like a regime change carried out in sacred language. And all the while, the deeper truth of the source keeps humming underneath. This is Babylon, writing itself into the oldest possible place. A local god cannot simply become supreme by being praised loudly. He must be inserted into primordial time. He must solve a crisis no older god could solve. He must demand the very powers Babylon itself would like to claim. Central authority, lawful decree, final judgment, stable order after chaos. The myth is building him into the kind of ruler Babylon wishes history itself would recognize. That is why this entire passage feels so important and so calm at the same time. We are not rushing toward the battle only for spectacle. We are watching a theology of empire take shape. The primordial waters, the sleeping father, the murdered old order, the monstrous mother, the frightened assembly, the ambitious young god. All of it is the slow ritual birth of a political claim. By now, the stage is ready. Tiamat has become the terrible mother of chaos. Kingu wears destiny on his chest. The older goods have faltered. The younger gods have surrendered their future to Marduk's terms. The winds are beginning to gather around him, even if they have not yet been loosed. The old world is about to be split open, and from its opened body, Babylon's supreme myth will emerge in full. The next movement must therefore go toward the confrontation itself, and then beyond it, because the battle is only half the point. The deeper point is what Marduk does afterward. He does not simply kill. He organizes. He arranges the stars, the year, the cosmos, and soon the human race itself. Chaos is not only defeated, it is made useful. That is the true Babylonian genius hidden inside the storm. By the time Marduk rides out, the battle has already become more than battle. It has become administration, waiting for a body. That may be the quietest, darkest truth in the whole episode. The source understands that Marduk is not being sent merely to destroy a threat. He is being sent to convert an ancient, dangerous, living reality into a governable structure. The older gods failed because they still belonged to the world before central command. Marduk succeeds because he was born for central command. That is what Babylon needs him to represent. And that is why the battle reads less like a spontaneous clash and more like the founding act of an empire. Still, the spectacle matters, and the tablets know it. Marduk takes up his weapons, and the description is full of movement. Bow, arrow, mace, net, storm, 4 winds, 7 winds in some interpretive traditions, whirlwind, cyclone, tempest, the restless forces of air tied to one divine will. I love how the source dwells on these details because they make the scene feel almost tactile. This is not the clean, abstract violence of later philosophical theology. This is weather made loyal. The very air becoming an armed retinue. Marduk does not simply enter battle. He arrives with the machinery of atmosphere behind him. Picture it slowly. The chariot moving not over road or riverbank, but through sacred darkness. The creatures drawing it not as beasts of burden, but as expressions of the same overwhelming energy that shines from their Lord. Their mouths open, poison foam at the lips, their hooves striking not dust but expectation itself. Around Marduk the winds gather, impatient and perfectly disciplined. The source uses these images so well because they turn him from a personified god into an environment. He is not merely a combatant. He is a climate. And facing that climate stands Tiamat. The old mother of the deep is no simple dragon waiting to be slain. She is immense, Oceanits, older than all city walls, older than kingship, older than calendars. The source is right to keep her dignity intact, because without dignity there is no real unease in the story. If she were only grotesque, Marduk's triumph would be too clean. But Tiamat is more than horror. She is origin transformed into opposition. She is the part of the universe that cannot be filed, counted, ranked, or permanently subdued without cost. Her monster host surrounds her. Serpents, composite beings, unnatural forms shaped from the anxiety of a civilization that wants categories to stay obedient. Kingu stands with the tablet of destinies upon his breast, and I always return to that image because it makes the coming defeat more than bodily. The one thing at stake here is not merely survival. It is the right to decree what the world means. The two meet. The source lets the confrontation breathe, and that breath matters. There is a moment before violence, and in ancient stories, such moments are often the truest. Marduk speaks. Tiamat answers. The air between them grows more charged than any spear line between armies. You can hear the whole political theology of Babylon humming under the exchange. One side represents old, untamed power. The other represents disciplined authority that calls itself salvation. The city wants us to hear this as obvious. Order good. Chaos bad. But when you sit with it in the dark, the simplicity begins to blur. The younger gods murdered first. The mother rose after injury. The Savior bargained for a throne before risking himself. Nothing about this cosmos is innocent. Then Marduk acts. He casts his net, not to kill at once, but to contain. That detail matters deeply. The first instinct of the new order is enclosure. Tiamat is surrounded, bound in movement even before the decisive strike. Then the winds are driven into her open mouth. This is one of the most unforgettable images in ancient myth, and the source handles it with just the right touch of distance. The winds do not merely buffet her. They force her open from within. They swell her. They hold her vulnerable. Her own vastness becomes a trap once the disciplined movement of Marduk's storm has entered her. There is such a brutal elegance in that tactic. Chaos is not overpowered head-on. It is made unable to close. Then the arrow flies. It enters. It tears through the distended body. It reaches the heart. Tiamat collapses. The tablets exult here, and one can understand why. For Babylon, this is the moment when all fear becomes legitimacy. The one God who asked for absolute kingship has now purchased it with victory. The old mother lies still. The monster host is scattered or bound. Kingu is seized. The tablet of destinies passes into Marduk's possession. It is all so complete, so narratively efficient, that one almost forgets what actually happened. The world has just been founded on the murder of its oldest source. I have always found it impossible not to pause there. Marduk is heroic in the public sense, yes, but he is also the inheritor of a divine tradition in which violence against parent power is what makes the next order possible. Ea killed Apsu. Marduk kills Tiamat. The city calls this progress. The source, wisely, lets the darkness of that pattern remain visible. The conquered host is bound. Kingu is stripped of the tablet. This is one of those moments where myth becomes almost administrative again. Rights transferred. Authority revoked. Offices reassigned. The energy of battle is already cooling into hierarchy. Even before the world is rebuilt, you can feel the clerical imagination re-entering the room. Who has the decree now? Who signs? Who commands? Who obeys? Victory must be filed. And then comes the act that makes Marduk more than a conqueror. He looks at Tiamat's body, and instead of treating the corpse as a warning or leaving it to rot in sacred memory, he treats it as material. He splits her, one half above, one half below. From the upper portion he forms heaven. From the lower, earth. He fixes bars, station, limits. He arranges the waters so they remain where they are assigned. The source rightly presses on this, because this is where Babylon's deepest imagination reveals itself. The answer to chaos is not annihilation. It is management. That is a much colder idea than simple victory. Marduk does not banish the old deep. He contends it. He gives it boundaries. He repurposes it into architecture. The world itself, then, is not a clean creation from nothing. It is a reordering of conquered disorder. That may be why Babylonian religion feels so urban in its bones. Cities do exactly this. They take floodplain, marsh, river, lavur, threat, noise, and human unpredictability, and force them into streets, canals, taxes, temple precincts, and legal categories. Marduk's creation is the cosmic version of city-making. Honestly, once you see that, the Enuma Elish becomes almost startlingly transparent. It is Babylon describing its own genius and calling the description eternal. The source then follows Marduk upward into the sky, and this is one of my favorite parts, because his kingship immediately becomes measured, organized, almost bureaucratic. He sets stars in their courses. He establishes the year. He gives the moon its phases. He assigns stations to divine beings. He creates a calendar. I love that. The storm god who just split the mother of the cosmos now turns to scheduling. The universe after victory must run on order, and order needs recurrence. Time itself is placed into administration. There is something deeply soothing in that, if you let it settle. The moon knowing where to rise, the stars holding their paths, seasons emerging not by whim, but by decree. Of course, behind that calm lies a corpse and a battle. But perhaps that is another truth the tablets understood. Peace is often what violence looks like after it has had time to write laws. The source also makes clear that Marduk's triumph is inseparable from the older gods' consent. They asked for deliverance. He demanded sovereignty. They accepted. This matters because Babylonian cosmic order is not pure tyranny. It is ratified hierarchy. The assembly fears. The assembly authorizes. The assembly later praises. That sequence mirrors political life on Earth too neatly to ignore. A crisis makes centralization acceptable. Victory makes it sacred. And yet there is one unresolved problem that no amount of stellar arrangement can hide. Work. The gods do not want endless labor. The ordered cosmos must be maintained. Temples must one day be served. Offerings must be brought. Fields and canals and sacred duties require hands. Heavenly order has to be carried into earthly practice. So the source moves us gently from stars to clay, from Tiamat's body to another body. Kings. The defeated commander, marked already by his stolen legitimacy, becomes the perfect substance for a new creation. Marduk decides that one rebel shall bear the burden of all. This is where the story becomes quietly devastating. Kingu's blood will be taken. Clay will be mixed with it. From this mingling human beings will emerge, not as companions to the gods, not as their beloved reflection, as workers, a maintenance, as those who will carry the toil that the divine order has no wish to keep for itself. I think that is one of the reasons the Babylonian creation vision remains so psychologically sharp even now. It does not flatter us. It tells us we are made from blood and mud for service. A rebel's blood, no less. There is a grim dignity in that, perhaps, but no sentimental comfort. Humanity enters the ordered world already indebted to hierarchy. The source is completely right to slow down before this transition. Because once humans are made, Babylon itself can appear as the earthly center of the cosmos. Marduk's temple, his city, his rituals, his priesthood, His annual festival, all of it will become the living continuation of what was won in this battle. The storm and arrow were only the opening act. The real goal was always structure, labor, and the making of a world where Babylon could stand at the middle and say, with a straight face, this is how reality was founded. That is where the next movement must go. Into clay and blood. Into the making of humankind. Into the building of Babylon as the city where cosmic order puts on brick, bitumen, incense, and law, and where Marduk's rise stops being myth alone and becomes a daily human system. Now the myth descends from the sky into labor, and that is where it becomes almost unbearably human. The source is very clear that Marduk does not stop at victory. He does what all successful rulers eventually do. He makes his triumph permanent by turning it into a system. The battle with Tiamat was not the end of the story, only the opening violence that allowed the rest to be arranged. A cosmos had been won. Yes. The stars had been set in their stations. Yes. The older thread had been cut apart and spread into sky and earth. But an ordered world does not maintain itself. It needs service. It needs repetition. It needs hands. And so the gods speak again of labor. This is one of the bleakest transitions in the whole epic, and perhaps one of the most revealing. The great divine assembly has been saved from terror, but it has not been saved from duty. Temples must one day be furnished. Offerings must be brought. Sacred order must be enacted in time and space. There are channels to tend, rituals to preserve, names to speak, altars to feed, structures to raise, and all the daily burdens that Babylonian civilization knew very well. The source handles this beautifully because it never lets the myth become abstract. The story may be cosmic, but the imagination behind it is urban, practical, administrative. Even heaven thinks in workloads. Marduk's answer is cold and efficient. Let one rebel bear the burden. Let a defeated being supply the living material for a lesser race that will carry toil in place of the gods. Kingu is selected, Tiamat's appointed consort, the figure who wore the tablet of destinies and stood for rival legitimacy, is now transformed into raw resource. His blood is taken. Clay is mixed with it. From that mixture, humanity is formed. I have always found this creation scene haunting in a quiet way. Human beings are not shaped from pure light or from the loving breath of a gentle creator. They are made from blood and mud, divine residue and earth, a condemned life mixed into the most ordinary substance on the floodplain. There is almost tenderness in clay as a material because clay belongs to the river world, to potters, bricks, tablets, children's hands, and temple walls. But the blood in it keeps the tenderness from becoming warm. It reminds you that humanity, in this myth, is born from punishment and necessity. The source insists on the purpose of that creation, and it is right to do so. Humans are not made to be adored by the gods. They are made to serve them, to relieve divine labor, to maintain temples, to bring offerings, to keep the sacred machine running so the gods may rest in their greatness. That vision of human life is almost brutally honest. It reflects a civilization that understood hierarchy, administration, and obligatory labor not as unfortunate accidents, but as the natural shape of reality. You can feel Mesopotamia in that idea. A world of irrigation ditches, temple storehouses, harvest obligations, scribal records, rationing, taxation, and kings claiming to mediate between heaven and earth. The myth tells ordinary people that work is not just social reality. It is cosmological destiny. You were made for it. The source is very sharp on this point. Myth here does not soothe. It stabilizes. It takes a difficult social order and roots it in the first age of the universe. And once humanity exists, Babylon itself can fully emerge. This, really, is where the entire story has been heading. The battle, the storm, the stars, the blood, all of it prepares the way for a city. Not merely any city, but Babylon, the earthly center where Marduk's victory is turned into brick, ritual, and public memory. The source treats this with the grandeur it deserves. Babylon is not presented as one political capital among many. It is imagined as the meeting point of the cosmic and the civic, the place where divine order descends and takes material form. Picture the city now at the height of its sacred life. Reed boats on the Euphrates. Mud brick walls glowing in late light. Processional roads worn by countless feet. Storerooms full of grain, oil, and wool. Temple courtyards filled with the murmuring sounds of labor and offering. Priests moving in linen. Scribes with clay tablets drying in neat stacks. Incense lifted in chambers where lamps glow against bitumen dark walls. The source understands that none of this is background. This is the real face of the myth. Tiamat dies so Babylon can stand. At the heart of it all rises Esagila, the great temple of Marduk. The very name carries weight. The house whose top is lofty. A place meant not merely to house ritual, but to anchor the universe in daily practice. When people brought offerings there, they were not performing small devotional acts in private. They were participating in the maintenance of cosmic order. Marduk's supremacy was not only a story recited at festivals. It was fed, washed, clothed, perfumed, and administered. That detail always arrests me. Gods in ancient Mesopotamia were not distant abstractions. Their statues were bodies. Their houses were real houses. Their meals were real ritual meals. Their garments were real garments. Their attendants were real human specialists whose work bound heaven to the city's economy. The source is excellent on this. A temple is never just a temple in Babylon. It is also a treasury, a political node, a center of storage and redistribution, a place where theology and daily labor become inseparable. And then there is the great ziggurat, the mountain of brick. Even now, when so much is broken and the old structure is gone or fragmentary, the very idea of it has not loosened its grip on the imagination. Rising in stages above the plain, it seems almost too symbolic to be real. An artificial sacred height built in a land where mountains do not naturally gather. I have always found that deeply revealing. Mesopotamia lacked the stable stone heights that other cultures took for granted, so it built vertical sacred ambition out of sun-dried brick and bitumen. It made its own mountain. The source lets that image breathe, and it should. A city raising a stair toward heaven is exactly the kind of architectural confidence Marduk's theology requires. The story then moves into one of the most important acts of theological conquest in the whole ancient world: the proclamation of Marduk's 50 names. This is not decorative praise. It is annexation through language. Each name attributed to Marduk carries a function, a domain, a sacred office, or an old divine prestige. The source is completely right to emphasize that this is where the takeover becomes total. Marduk does not merely defeat Tiamat and become strongest. He absorbs. He becomes the one through whom older divine capacities are interpreted. Enlil's command, Ea's wisdom, solar force, kingly power, judicial authority, all of it can be gathered into Marduk's growing totality. It is a breathtaking theological maneuver. Instead of openly abolishing every older god, the tradition redraws the map so that their significance survives under Marduk's name. Old powers are not always denied. They are subordinated, translated, folded inward. That is how empires prefer to work when they are intelligent. They do not always destroy what came before. They rename it and make it theirs. You know that feeling when one institution grows so large that every older institution must either merge into it or become a quaint survival. That is what the 50 names do on a divine scale. The source then brings in the Akitu festival, and this is where everything becomes wonderfully public, ceremonial, and a little unnerving. New Year in Babylon was not a quiet devotional season. It was a civic renewal of the universe. The Enuma Elish was recited. Marduk's victory was made present again. The king was brought before the god, stripped of royal symbols, slapped by the high priest, and required to confess that he had not failed in his duties. If tears came to his eyes, the omen was good. Then his regalia were restored. Rule passed back through ritual humiliation and divine permission. What a remarkable piece of political theater. The king stands above ordinary people, but below Marduk. The priest stands as mediator. The city watches sacred power, humble royal power. Only so royal power can be publicly reauthorized. The source understands exactly how much work this ritual does. It reinforces the social order, strengthens the temple, limits the king while also sanctifying him, and reminds everyone that Babylon's stability depends on cosmic approval. This is not religion as private comfort. It is religion as constitutional drama. The Enuma Elish itself, recited in that context, becomes more than myth. It becomes annual maintenance. The story of Marduk's victory is not simply remembered. It is reactivated. Time is reset. Chaos is defeated again. The city hears, year after year, that its God is supreme and that its own place in the world is not accidental. The source is brilliant in showing how repetition makes theology feel inevitable. Say a thing at the right festival, in the right temple, before the right audience, for enough generations, and it begins to feel less like a claim and more like reality. That is one reason Marduk's rise has such enduring force in the source. It reveals how belief becomes infrastructure. And once Babylon reaches imperial magnitude, Marduk's theology begins affecting those beyond Babylon as well. The Assyrians, for example, could not ignore it. Their own great god, Ashur, eventually takes over the same structural role in rewritten versions of the epic. This is one of my favorite details because it is so transparent. The form of the myth is too politically useful to abandon. So another empire takes the pattern and changes the name. The cosmic script survives because it works. Then come the Judeans in exile, and the emotional temperature changes again. The source is careful and intelligent here. It does not claim some simplistic, one-way borrowing, but it does show the profound pressure Babylonian theology would have placed on exiles forced to live under its shadow. Imagine being a displaced priest, scribe, or elder from Judah, hearing a culture proclaim that its God defeated primordial chaos, created humanity, and placed Babylon at the center of the ordered world. You would not respond only politically. You would respond theologically. The source suggests that the calm, ordered creation of Genesis, a God making by speech without combat, waters present but not divine rivals, may be read at least partly as a countervision. I find that possibility profoundly beautiful. One empire says, "Order was founded through divine violence, and our city is its center." Another tradition answers, "The true creator needs no battle, and no empire owns the middle of reality." That is not just religious disagreement. It is a struggle over what kind of world human beings live in. The Persians then enter with their own elegance. Cyrus conquered Babylon, but instead of openly insulting Marduk, he presents himself as chosen by Marduk. Again, the pattern reveals itself. If a city's sacred order is strong enough, conquerors must speak its language before they can safely replace its rulers. The source is right to stress this. Marduk's power becomes so culturally deep that even foreign kings seek legitimacy by standing under his gaze. But sacred centrality is never truly permanent. Babylon weakens. Ritual life continues. Then phrase. Dynasty pass. Languages shift. The old cuneiform world becomes harder to sustain. Scholars debate details of temple damage and the fate of Marduk's image under later rulers like Xerxes, and the source keeps that uncertainty visible where it should. We do not possess every final act with complete clarity, yet the larger movement is not in doubt. The God who once ruled the cosmos through narrative, ritual, and imperial repetition begins to fade as the institutions that carried him lose their force. I have always found that melancholy rather than triumphant. Marduk is not merely disproven. He is outlived. The city that raised him as universal is broken. The priests who fed him are gone. The clay signs in which his supremacy was written can no longer be read by the people walking past their fragments. A God made supreme by history becomes dependent on history for his survival. And then, centuries later, modern hands dig in broken ground and touch the tablets again. That return is one of the quiet miracles of scholarship. No Renaissance, no divine procession, no king kneeling before the image. Only archaeologists, dust, fragments, lamps, patience, grammar, comparison, and long labor over damaged signs. Yet something returns all the same. The voice of Babylon reemerges, not to command, but to testify. The source's final lesson settles there with real force. Marduk did not become supreme because supremacy had always belonged to him in some obvious cosmic sense. He became supreme because Babylon, through empire, Templar ritual, scribal transmission, and public repetition, built a universe around him and then taught generations to hear that universe as natural. The myth was political theology at its highest pitch. The god and the city climbed together. That is why his fall matters too. When Babylon's centrality fades, Marduk's universality begins loosening with it. Not at once, not cleanly, but unmistakably. In the end, the cosmic order turns out to have been historical order wearing divine brightness. Honestly, that is what makes the whole story so eerie and so calming at once. It reminds us that human beings are forever tempted to take the local and crown it eternal. A city becomes the center of the world. A patron becomes the ruler of heaven. A victory becomes the origin of all things. Then time passes. Brick cracks. Rivers shift. Empire goes silent. And the old total certainty survives only in clay. Still, the clay survives. The wedges, pressed by long dead scribes, remain. The names remain. Tiamat, Apsu, Ea, Kingu, Marduk. The old battle remains. The old ambition remains. The old human desire to transform political order into cosmic truth remains perhaps most of all. That is why the source lingers after the fall. This is not only a story about a Babylonian god. It is a story about how power dreams of itself. And out in the ruins, where bitumen once sealed great walls and temple smoke once climbed into the Mesopotamian light, the dust settles again over broken foundations. The city is quiet now. The rituals are gone. The image is gone. The priests are gone. Yet the old claim still drifts toward us from the tablets, calm and undiminished in its own certainty. There was a god who defeated chaos. There was a city at the center. There was a world arranged by victory and maintained by labor. Believe this. Repeat this. Live inside this. And order will continue. The tablets say it softly now, because they can do nothing else. We are the ones listening by another fire. Much later, hearing in their old confidence something both alien and familiar. The names are ancient. The machinery beneath them is not. A crisis, a savior, a central authority, a narrative that absorbs rivals and calls itself inevitable. The rise of Marduk belongs to Babylon. Yes, but its deeper pattern belongs to history again and again. That is why the night grows so still around this story. It is not dead. It is waiting in every age for the next city bold enough to place its own god, its own law, or its own name in the middle of the universe. And Babylon, broken though it is, still whispers how that is done. When a god falls, he rarely falls all at once. That is the mood the Source leaves us with in its final long descent. And it is exactly the right mood for Marduk, a god who was made supreme through city, templa, empire, ritual, and repetition cannot simply vanish like a candle pinched between fingers. He lingers. He is carried by habit, by architecture, by priests who still know the chants, by scribes who still know the signs, by old people who remember the procession route and can still point toward the chamber where the image once sat, by kings who may no longer fully belong to Babylon and yet understand that they must still borrow Babylon's god if they want Babylon's obedience. So the decline begins not as emptiness, but as thinning. The Source understands that beautifully. The great sacred machine remains in place for a long time, even after the confidence that built it has started to crack. Temples still stand. The Akitu can still be imagined, if not always performed in full old splendor. Priests still tend what they can. Sacred buildings still contain an atmosphere. I have always thought ruins are less sad when they are fully dead. What is sadder is the long middle phase, when forms survive but force is draining out of them. A temple still receiving offerings, but fewer. A ritual still known, but performed for a changed audience. A language still written, but by fewer hands. That was Babylon under later powers. The Source touches this through the Persians, then beyond them, and the emotional effect is cumulative. Cyrus can still present himself as chosen by Marduk, because Marduk still matters enough for that claim to be useful. That alone tells you how deep the god's prestige had sunk into the political earth of Mesopotamia. Conquerors do not flatter dead powers without reason. They flatter powers that still govern the imagination of the conquered. So Marduk survives his own city's political defeat by living as legitimacy. But legitimacy too has a lifespan. As centuries move, the old world changes underneath him. Imperial forms shift. Languages evolve. Hellenistic influence spreads after Alexander. Temples continue in altered landscapes. Priests learn to navigate worlds in which Babylon is no longer the unchallenged middle of anything. And this, to me, is one of the most melancholy truths hidden in the Source. A god made for centrality suffers most when the world becomes plural around him. Marduk had risen because Babylon taught the cosmos to speak his name as if it were the natural summit of divine power. Once Babylon itself could no longer guarantee that centrality, the god's universal shape became harder to sustain. He was still revered, still remembered, still present in ritual consciousness. But the conditions that made his supremacy feel inevitable were fading. You know that feeling when an institution keeps its ceremonies long after its certainty has started draining away. The gestures remain graceful. The confidence in them grows thinner. That is how I imagine late Marduk, still enthroned in old language, yet increasingly exposed to time. The Source also raises the question of Xerxes and the later fate of Babylonian cult life. The details are debated, and the Source is careful about that where it should be. We do not know every final movement with clean certainty. Accounts of destruction, removal, suppression, and the fate of Marduk's statue have to be handled cautiously. Some ancient reports are charged with political bias. Some later reconstructions go too far. Yet the general movement remains persuasive. the temple world weakens. The god who once received the tears of kings at Akitu becomes less and less the center of living political time. That softens the whole atmosphere of the story in a way I find very powerful. We began with 7 tablets uncovered from dust, a city trying to tell us again how it raised its local god into cosmic supremacy. We passed through primordial waters, divine murder, Tiamat's death, human creation, Esagila, the 50 names, the humiliation of kings, the radiance of processions, the spread of Babylonian prestige through fear and admiration. And now, quietly, it all passes into age. The image that stays with me is the image of a temple after the crowd has thinned, not abandoned in one blow, just quieter. One court with fewer feet crossing it, one storeroom less full, one priest more aware that he is preserving rather than ruling, one festival more burdened by memory than by certainty, incense still rising, perhaps, but into a world that no longer arranges itself around the same center. The source does not exaggerate this into melodrama. It lets the melancholy do its own work. And then, more slowly still, cuneiform itself declines. This is perhaps the most intimate death of all. A god whose rise depended on tablets, récitation, archives, scribes, hymns, and learned continuity eventually loses the script that carried his ascent. The wedges remain on clay. The clay remains in libraries, temples, rubble, or forgotten strata. But fewer and fewer people can hear the signs. Fewer can shape them. Fewer can copy the old names into new generations. It is one thing for a statue to break. It is another for a civilization's reading hand to weaken. I have always found that far more sorrowful, because once the script dies, the god enters silence in a special way. Not to tell silence, perhaps. His temples may still be remembered. His stories may echo in transformed traditions. But the exact voice, the old voice, the ritual phrasing that once made him supreme, falls quiet. He becomes a ruin in language before he becomes one in stone. And then, centuries later, the modern world returns. The source ends with archaeology for good reason. Men digging in Babylon, in dust and broken brick, finding tablets, fragments, signs, archives of a dead literacy. The scene has none of the old sacred theater. No white-robed priest, no annual recitation, no king trembling before Marduk's image. Instead, brushes, spades, measurements, catalog numbers, museum cases, philologists bending over impressions in clay under poor light and later better light, making lists, comparing fragments, rebuilding lines word by word. Yet, in its own quiet way, this is another restoration. Not restoration of the cult, restoration of the voice. The source begins there and returns there because it understands how strange that is. Marduk does not come back as a living god. He comes back as evidence, as testimony, as one of history's most revealing examples of how religious supremacy can be built, extended, ritualized, and eventually undone. His return is intellectual rather than devotional. That changes him, but it does not make him less powerful. In some ways, it makes him more unsettling, because now he can be seen from two angles at once. From within the myth, he is victor over chaos, creator of order, founder of the world as Babylon needed to imagine it. From outside the myth, he is a political achievement, a divine office assembled by empire, temple economy, narrative genius, and repetition until older powers were absorbed into his name. The source holds both views close together, and that is what gives the ending its depth. It never mocks the Babylonians for believing. It simply shows how their belief was made, how carefully it was maintained, and how faithfully it mirrored Babylon's own rise. When the city rose, Marduk rose. When the city needed cosmic justification, Marduk's myth grew larger. When rival empires needed Babylonian obedience, they borrowed Marduk's sanction. When the world moved on, the god dimmed with the institutions that had carried him. Honestly, it is hard to imagine a more elegant example of the bond between theology and power. And yet there is more than politics here. That is why the story stays in the mind. Marduk's rise also reveals something permanent in human beings. We long to take the local and make it cosmic. We long to believe our city, our law, our patron, our story is not merely one arrangement among many, but the arrangement toward which all things have always been moving. Babylon did that with extraordinary brilliance. It took a once minor god and built a universe around him. Not a little universe. The whole thing. Stars, kings, lavor, temple, calendar, fate. That is almost breathtaking in its audacity. No wonder the story lingers after the city is gone. If you stand in imagination at the end of it all, the ruins spread around you. Brick mounds, broken lines of walls. The river not far away. Wind carrying grit over places once polished by processions. No chant now. No festival crowd. No divine statue in the chamber. Only the sense that somewhere under the dust lay the words that once convinced a civilization it stood at the center of creation. And then, in the modern age, the tablets are lifted out and read again. I think that final image is the right one to rest in. Not because it is cheerful, but because it transforms grandeur into stillness. A god who ruled the cosmos becomes a text. A city that called itself the center becomes an archaeological site. A myth that justified empire becomes a document in a museum drawer. Then a translated story. Then a late-night whisper beside another fire. Yet nothing about that makes it trivial. If anything, it makes it more intimate. The old certainty is gone. What remains is the mechanism, the pattern, the astonishing human act of building eternity out of clay, blood, and political need. That is Marduk's true afterlife. Not only in scholars' books, not only in ruins, but in every later age that tries to raise its own favored order into cosmic necessity. Every time a people says our law is the shape of reality, our city is the center, our victory was written into the stars, our enemies are chaos. Our rule is the answer the world has always awaited. Somewhere far below those words, old Babylon is still speaking. The source leaves us with that recognition, and it is a beautiful place to end. Marduk was not merely a god of a dead empire. He was one of history's clearest demonstrations that power seeks heaven's language when earth's language is not enough. He rose because Babylon made his rise feel like nature itself. He endured because ritual, templa, and text repeated him into the bones of public life. He faded because all such systems, however grand, eventually pass into dust, translation, and memory. The night is quiet now. The tablets are cool in their drawers. The old signs remain where ancient hands pressed them. And in those signs, the God still waits, not to be worshipped, perhaps, but to be understood. A local deity made universal. A city made cosmic. A myth made into government. A government made into myth. And as the fire beside us burns lower, that seems like the softest and darkest truth of all. The gods people fear most are often the ones they have spent the most labor making inevitable. Good night.